Most people never realize they are playing a game. They wake up, they struggle, they chase, they lose, and they begin again the next morning, never once stopping to ask, why? Why does effort so rarely match outcome? Why do some people seem to move through life with a quiet certainty, while others, no matter how hard they push, feel like they are running against an invisible current? What if the current was never outside you? What if the game has always had rules, and no one ever told you what they were? What you are about to hear is not motivation. It is not advice. It is something older, something that has survived empires, dissolved civilizations, and shaped the inner lives of the wisest human beings who ever walked this earth. For centuries, a single book has circulated quietly among seekers, thinkers, and those who refused to accept that life was purely a matter of chance. Its pages do not promise wealth. They do not guarantee success. Instead, they propose something far more radical, something that once understood cannot be unforgotten. That the invisible world of thought, faith, expectation, and spoken word quietly constructs the visible world around you, brick by brick, moment by moment, whether you intend it or not. The danger is not in the power itself. The danger is in using it blindly. Most people are using this power against themselves every single day, speaking limitation into existence, rehearsing defeat before it arrives, and confirming every fear with the quiet authority of repetition. And they never realize it, because no one ever taught them the rules of the game. Stay with this until the very last word, because the final principle in this journey may permanently alter the way you understand time, destiny, and who you actually are beneath everything life has told you to become. The illusion of lack. There is a quiet deception that has shadowed humanity since the first communities gathered beside rivers and beneath mountain ranges. It is not born from empty fields or empty hands. It originates somewhere far deeper, in the unseen chambers of the mind. Long before a person lacks resources, they often begin to believe they lack possibility. The ancient philosophers observed this subtle erosion with great concern, because they understood that the most dangerous poverty was never the absence of possessions. It was the conviction that nothing more could ever emerge. An old saying passed among wise elders declared that the empty bowl is not always the one without food. Sometimes it is the one that refuses to see what has already been placed inside. This was never a lesson about dismissing hardship. Droughts came, harvests collapsed, empires crumbled. Genuine suffering has always existed. But the ancients made a careful distinction between true necessity and the endless dissatisfaction that quietly consumes the human heart from within. They recognized something that modern life consistently forgets: that scarcity can become a habit of perception rather than a condition of reality. Consider two farmers living in the same valley many centuries ago. Both depended upon the same river. Both watched the same skies. Both prayed for the same rain. Then arrived a year unlike any before it. Clouds gathered but refused to release. The river retreated into cracked earth. Crops withered beneath the relentless sun, and every household feared the approaching winter. The first farmer walked his fields every morning, repeating the same words. "There is nothing left. The land has abandoned me. I am already defeated." As the weeks passed, he stopped repairing his fences because he believed there would be nothing left worth protecting. He neglected the old well because he assumed it had already run dry. He ignored the fruit trees growing along the boundary of his property because they no longer matched the image of abundance he carried in his mind. The second farmer stood beneath the same burning sky. He did not pretend the drought was easy. He did not force a smile while his crops withered. Yet every morning he asked a different question. What still remains? That single question transformed everything. He discovered wild herbs growing beneath shaded rocks. He cleared the neglected well and found water deep beneath the surface. He traded wisely with neighboring villages rather than isolating himself in despair. He gathered figs from trees planted decades earlier by his grandfather, trees he had nearly forgotten existed. Neither man controlled the drought, but each was governed by an entirely different way of seeing it. Years later, people called one fortunate and the other unfortunate. The elders shook their heads slowly. It was never fortune, they said. It was attention. The lesson preserved within this story has moved through countless generations for a reason. Gratitude is not merely a pleasant feeling. It is a discipline of perception. It trains the eyes to recognize opportunities that fear quietly conceals. This does not suggest that gratitude magically dissolves difficulty. Rather, it prevents difficulty from becoming the only reality the mind can register. Modern understanding echoes this ancient observation precisely. When the mind becomes fixated on loss, it begins filtering out evidence of possibility. Attention narrows. Creativity diminishes. Every setback appears permanent because the mind ceases searching for alternatives. The ancient teachers understood this long before laboratories existed. They watched kings lose kingdoms through despair, while humble craftsmen quietly rebuilt entire lives with little more than patience and sharpened attention. One wandering philosopher was once asked how a struggling traveler could become wealthy. His listeners expected descriptions of trade routes and clever transactions. Instead, he answered with another question. What wealth have you already refused to count? Silence moved through the gathering. Some among them possessed knowledge they had never shared. Others held friendships they had allowed to go unattended. Some carried remarkable abilities, yet dismissed them entirely because they compared themselves to more prosperous neighbors. Many had overlooked time itself, the one treasure equally entrusted to every living person. The philosopher smiled quietly. The mind that overlooks small blessings will overlook great opportunities as well. This is why gratitude appears near the center of nearly every ancient wisdom tradition. It was never intended merely as politeness or ceremony. It was training, daily practice, a deliberate reshaping of the lens through which existence is experienced. A grateful mind notices. A fearful mind overlooks. One discovers doors. The other sees only walls. Perhaps this explains why certain individuals appear capable of rebuilding after devastating hardship, while others remain imprisoned by circumstances long after those circumstances have shifted. The difference frequently begins with the stories they repeatedly rehearse about what remains possible. Look carefully at your own life, not at what is missing, but at what has quietly remained. The friend who still answers your call, the wisdom earned through failure, the strength gained from surviving difficult seasons, the opportunities concealed behind abilities you have nearly forgotten you possess. Abundance rarely arrives with the noise we expect. Sometimes it has been standing quietly beside you all along, waiting for your awareness to finally recognize it. The ancient masters advised their students to begin every morning with a single question: what still remains? That question alone has redirected countless lives. Notice the abundance already present. Only then can you begin to see the opportunities still quietly unfolding. If this truth is shifting something inside you right now, if you feel your awareness expanding in this moment, drop 444. I am rooted in trust, and I see what fear hides, in the comments below. That number carries the energy of alignment, of foundations being laid in silence, of roots spreading before the tree ever becomes visible. Leave it as a declaration, not for anyone else, for yourself. If this journey is speaking to something you have been searching for, share it with one person who needs to hear it today. And if you are not yet part of the mind psychology community, this is your moment. Every week, we go deeper into the principles that quietly govern the lives of those who seem to navigate existence with rare clarity. Subscribe so you never miss what might be exactly what you needed to hear. The Law of Imagination. Long before the first stone was placed upon the earth, the temple already existed. Not in marble, not in cedar, not beneath an open sky. It lived within the imagination of the builder. Every civilization that left behind monuments still admired centuries later understood a truth easily forgotten today: nothing meaningful is created twice. Every lasting achievement is first constructed in silence, in the unseen space of the mind, long before it is ever revealed to the world. Ancient architects were known to spend months walking empty fields before a single foundation was placed. Observers frequently mistook this for hesitation. It was preparation. They were learning to see what did not yet exist. One master builder from antiquity was asked why he spent so much time studying bare ground. He replied gently, "I am not looking at the earth. I am looking at the temple hidden inside it." His apprentices laughed quietly, convinced the old man had become lost in fantasy. Years later, travelers crossed entire kingdoms to admire the finished sanctuary. Only then did the students understand. The temple had not appeared suddenly. It had simply become visible. This ancient lesson reaches far beyond architecture. Every invention, every masterpiece, every courageous journey, and every transformed life begins first as an unseen possibility held steadily within the imagination. The philosophers never regarded imagination as childish fantasy. They treated it as one of humanity's most extraordinary creative instruments. Plato proposed that visible forms reflect deeper realities grasped first by the mind. Later thinkers observed that every meaningful action follows an inner image of what is possible. Whether a person seeks understanding, crafts a work of art, or transforms a long-held habit, the process begins with a vision that quietly directs each step. History reflects this pattern with remarkable consistency. Explorers imagined coastlines before their ships reached them. Inventors envisioned solutions before their hands built them. Great leaders often carried a picture of a transformed future long before anyone else believed it could exist. Imagination does not replace effort. It gives effort direction. Without vision, activity becomes scattered. With vision, even small actions begin moving toward a meaningful destination. There is an old parable about a sculptor who stood before an enormous block of stone. Those passing by mocked him because they saw only rough granite. For weeks he chipped away patiently. Someone finally asked, "How did you know a beautiful figure was hidden inside that stone?" The sculptor smiled. "I did not create it. I simply removed everything that did not belong." So it is with human character. The person you hope to become is not constructed in a single moment of inspiration. They are revealed gradually as unnecessary fears, limiting beliefs, and forgotten habits are patiently carved away. Imagination serves as the blueprint for that inner process. It allows you to rehearse wisdom before the difficult conversation arrives, to picture courage before fear appears, to grow familiar with integrity long before it is tested. Many ancient schools encouraged their students to spend time each day quietly contemplating the kind of person they wished to become. Not the wealth they hoped to accumulate, not the recognition they hoped to receive, but the character they wished to embody. For they understood a profound truth: possessions can be lost, titles can vanish, character endures. Spend a few moments each day imagining yourself responding with patience where you once reacted with anger. See yourself speaking with steadiness where uncertainty once ruled. Picture yourself moving with generosity where fear once held tightly. These quiet rehearsals do not guarantee specific outcomes, but they prepare the mind to recognize possibilities and to respond with greater intention when moments of decision arise. The builder sees the temple before the stone is shaped. The gardener envisions the harvest before the first seed is placed in the ground. The wise person imagines the character they wish to cultivate before life asks them to reveal it. Do not spend all your imagination on what you wish to possess. Invest even more in imagining the person you are becoming, because every enduring creation begins unseen, and the greatest work you will ever build is not a house, not a business, not a legacy. It is your own character. Non-resistance opens the way. There is an old story told among wandering sages about a river that spent centuries seeking the sea. Along its course stood cliffs, forests, deserts, and valleys. Yet its greatest obstacle was a single enormous stone resting at 300 the center of its path. Travelers who visited the place year after year expected the river to halt there permanently. The stone appeared immovable, ancient beyond memory, a monument to permanence itself. But when those travelers returned decades later, something extraordinary had occurred. The stone had not moved. The river had. Rather than exhausting itself by striking the rock with increasing force each season, the water quietly discovered another route. It curved around the obstacle, gradually widening its course until the once insurmountable barrier became nothing more than part of the surrounding landscape. Eventually, the same river that had refused to fight the stone carried tiny grains of sand that polished its rough surface smooth. The sages smiled whenever they told this story. The river never defeated the stone, they would say. It simply refused to become its captive. This is one of the oldest lessons preserved across ancient philosophies. Many people measure strength by how forcefully they push against life. They imagine that every obstacle demands greater intensity, louder resistance, tighter control. Yet the wisest teachers observed a different pattern. They noticed that excessive force often strengthens the very struggle it hopes to dissolve. Resistance carries a curious nature. The more fiercely a person insists that reality should already be different, the more energy they surrender to frustration. They begin fighting not only circumstances, but also their own thoughts. The present moment becomes an adversary rather than a teacher. This does not mean accepting injustice or abandoning meaningful effort. The ancient masters never praised passivity. They praised intelligent response. There is a profound difference between surrendering to life and cooperating with its deeper rhythms. The Taoist sages spoke often of water because they believed it revealed the highest expression of strength. Water possesses no fixed shape, yet over time it carves mountains. It never disputes with gravity. It follows the path available to it, adapting without losing its direction. Its power comes not from aggression, but from persistence guided by awareness. Centuries later, Stoic philosophers arrived at a remarkably similar understanding through entirely different language. They advised their students to distinguish carefully between what lies within their influence and what does not. Energy directed toward resisting the unavoidable weakens the mind. Energy directed toward one's own character strengthens it. Although separated by continents and cultures, both traditions pointed quietly toward the same truth. Peace begins when effort is no longer wasted on the uncontrollable. An old monastery once stood beside a dense bamboo forest. Every autumn, fierce storms swept across the valley, snapping the branches of mighty oaks like dry twigs. Young students often asked the elder monk why the bamboo survived while larger trees fell. Rather than answering immediately, the old monk led them into the forest after the storm passed. The bamboo had bent almost to the earth beneath the weight of the wind, but it had not broken. When the storm released its hold, every stalk rose again, unchanged except for a few scattered leaves. The monk placed his hand gently upon the smooth green stem. "Strength that refuses to bend eventually shatters," he said. The students never forgot those words. Many years later, they understood that the lesson had never been about plants. How often do we hold tightly to expectations long after life has quietly invited us toward a different path? How often do we exhaust ourselves demanding that yesterday return, or that tomorrow arrive sooner than it will? The greatest suffering frequently grows not from what happens, but from our refusal to release what can no longer be shaped. Modern understanding echoes this ancient observation. When the mind resists painful emotions, those emotions frequently become more persistent. Anxiety resisted deepens. Anger resisted transforms silently into bitterness. Grief denied lingers beneath every conversation. Acceptance, however, creates space for wise action. It allows the mind to stop fighting reality long enough to ask the only question that matters: what is the next right step? A sailor crossing an unpredictable sea understands this instinctively. He cannot command the wind. He cannot silence the storm. But by adjusting his sails, he can continue moving toward his destination. The sea has not become easier. The sailor has become wiser. So it is with life. When disappointment arrives, acknowledge it fully. When plans change, adapt them with intention. When obstacles appear, study them before confronting them. The river reaches the sea not because it overpowers every stone, but because it never forgets where it is going. There are moments when courage appears as standing firm. There are other moments when courage appears as changing direction without abandoning purpose. The wise understand the difference. Ask yourself a quiet question today. Where in your life are you striking the same stone again and again? Could there be another path you have refused to notice simply because it does not resemble the one you originally imagined? The river teaches that movement matters more than stubbornness. The bamboo reminds us that flexibility is frequently greater strength than force. Respond rather than resist. Sometimes the path opens not because the world changes, but because you do. Gratitude before the harvest. One of the most astonishing customs of the ancient world took place long before any harvest was certain. In communities scattered across fertile valleys and mountain terraces, families gathered while the fields were still green. The grain had not yet matured. The fruits still held tightly to young branches. Storms could still arrive. Drought could still return. Nothing was guaranteed, and yet they offered thanks. To the impatient observer, the ritual appeared almost irrational. Why give thanks before success? Why express gratitude before certainty? The elders answered with remarkable simplicity. Because the grateful heart prepares itself to receive what fear cannot even recognize. This tradition was never merely ceremonial. It reflected a profound comprehension of the human mind. The ancients understood that appreciation transforms attention. A person consumed entirely by what is absent will consistently overlook what is quietly growing. Consider two gardeners tending neighboring orchards. Each plants identical seeds beneath the same spring sky. Weeks pass with little visible progress. The first gardener moves through his rows every morning, lamenting that nothing is happening. He grows impatient, reduces his watering, and eventually abandons several young trees because he assumes they have already failed. The second gardener walks the same rows with entirely different eyes. He notices tiny shoots breaking through the soil. He clears weeds from around fragile roots. He tends consistently, not because he already sees fruit, but because he trusts the unseen process unfolding beneath the surface. Months later, visitors admire his flourishing orchard. They call him fortunate. The old gardener simply smiles. They did not see the gratitude that watered these trees long before any fruit appeared. This is one of the quiet principles repeated throughout ancient wisdom traditions. Gratitude does not alter the laws of nature. It does not guarantee that every hope will be fulfilled precisely as imagined. What it transforms is the person who practices it. A grateful mind becomes attentive. It notices possibilities. It values connections. It protects opportunities that an impatient mind frequently discards. Modern research offers a parallel insight. Appreciation broadens attention, builds resilience, and encourages creative thinking. When individuals regularly reflect on what carries meaning rather than exclusively on what is absent, they tend to recognize more pathways for growth. The ancients discovered this through observation long before science gave it language. An old craftsman once accepted two apprentices. Both possessed equal ability. One complained endlessly about imperfect tools, difficult clients, and slow advancement. The other expressed thanks to his teacher each evening for one lesson absorbed that day, however small. Years later, the second apprentice became a master celebrated throughout the region. When asked about the foundation of his success, he did not mention superior skill. He said, "Gratitude taught me to recognize what every difficult day was trying to show me." Ordinary moments are easily dismissed because they arrive without announcement. A shared meal, a faithful companion, the strength to begin again after collapse. a sunrise witnessed without hurry. These gifts rarely announce themselves with grandeur, yet they slowly construct the foundation upon which every meaningful life is built. Perhaps this is why ancient teachers encouraged their students to begin and end each day with gratitude, not because every day was easy, but because every day contained something deserving of careful attention. Gratitude is not denial. It is disciplined perception. It refuses to allow hardship to become the only story. Before the harvest appears, honor the seed. Before success arrives, appreciate the effort. Before tomorrow unfolds, be present to today. Because the person who learns to recognize quiet gifts is often the very person prepared to cultivate greater ones. Give thanks before results appear. The harvest begins in the heart long before it reaches the field. Fear casts shadows. There is an old tale carried among desert caravans about a traveler who refused to continue his journey after the sun disappeared. Every evening, as darkness gathered at the horizon, he would catch sight of a dark figure stretching across the sand behind him. Convinced that someone was pursuing him, he abandoned campsites, rerouted his path, and spent countless sleepless nights bracing for a confrontation that never came. One evening, an elderly guide quietly approached and lit a single lantern. The traveler turned. The terrifying figure instantly shrank. It was his own shadow. The old guide regarded him with compassion rather than amusement. "You have not been fleeing an enemy," he said softly. "You have been fleeing the shape cast by your own position." The traveler stood motionless. His greatest fear had never possessed substance of its own. It had borrowed its power from darkness and distance. The wise preserved this story because they understood something timeless about the human mind. Fear often behaves like a shadow. It begins as a small uncertainty, but left unexamined, it expands across the imagination until it appears far greater than the reality it represents. Fear has always served a necessary function. Without it, our ancestors would not have survived dangerous wilderness, unpredictable seas, or brutal winters. It warned them of genuine threats and encouraged thoughtful preparation. But the ancient philosophers also identified another kind of fear, one that protected nothing. It existed almost entirely within imagined futures, convincing people to suffer events that had never actually arrived. This distinction became one of the foundations of wisdom. There is caution, and there is panic. Caution asks, "How may I prepare?" Panic insists, "Disaster has already begun." The difference between the two determines whether fear becomes a reliable guide or a relentless captor. Centuries ago, before armies advanced into uncertain terrain, experienced commanders studied their youngest soldiers closely. They observed that those consumed by fear frequently exhausted themselves before any engagement began. Their breath became shallow, their hands trembled, their minds raced ahead, rehearsing every possible defeat. By the time the first signal sounded, they had already fought 100 invisible battles inside their own thoughts. Veterans responded differently. They did not pretend fear was absent. They simply refused to let it assume command. Many traditions trained soldiers to steady their breathing before raising their weapons. Some stood silently in the morning air. Others repeated simple phrases that returned them to the present moment. Their preparation was never purely physical. It was psychological. For they understood that a frightened mind rarely perceives clearly. Fear narrows perception like a tunnel. It focuses attention so completely on the possibility of danger that every other reality quietly withdraws. Opportunities go unseen. Wise counsel is dismissed. Small difficulties become catastrophic because imagination magnifies them far beyond their actual proportion. Modern understanding describes this phenomenon with precision. When fear governs the nervous system, attention becomes highly selective. The mind prioritizes potential threats while filtering out evidence of safety, creativity, and alternative paths. The ancients arrived at the same understanding without instruments. They simply observed human beings long enough to recognize the recurring pattern. One philosopher walked through a crowded marketplace carrying a small mirror. His students asked why. He replied, "To remind myself where fear truly begins." Seeing their uncertainty, he continued, "Most dangers appear first outside us, but the suffering they generate almost always grows inside us. Events influence us. Interpretation governs us. Consider your own life honestly. How many sleepless nights were devoted to conversations that unfolded peacefully the following morning? How many opportunities were set aside because imagined failure appeared more convincing than unseen possibility? How many years were quietly surrendered to fears that never crossed the threshold from imagination into reality? This does not suggest that every fear is without foundation. Some dangers deserve careful attention. The wise person does not disregard warning signs or abandon thoughtful planning. But wisdom asks one more question before yielding entirely. Is this fear revealing reality or merely projecting a possibility? That single question creates space between sensation and action, and within that space lives something rare, genuine freedom. The old traveler eventually completed his journey across the desert, not because the world became safer, but because he learned to turn and face the darkness whenever fear whispered too loudly. Again and again, he discovered that many shadows dissolved the moment he looked directly at them. This is why the ancient teachers maintained that courage is not the absence of fear, it is the willingness to examine fear before surrendering to it. Every shadow deserves observation. Not every shadow deserves obedience. Question every fear before obeying it, because many of the barriers that appear to stand between you and the life you sense is possible are nothing more than darkness waiting for the light of honest awareness. Faith dissolves struggle. One of the greatest paradoxes preserved in ancient wisdom is this: the more tightly a person grasps the current of life, the more exhausted they become. At first, this seems impossible. Surely greater effort produces greater results. Surely relentless control guarantees success. Yet those who devoted their lives to studying the rhythms of nature noticed an entirely different pattern. The flower does not strain to bloom. The dawn does not labor to become morning. The seasons arrive without anxiety. Only human beings consistently confuse constant tension with meaningful progress. There is an old account of two archers who sought guidance from a celebrated master. Both possessed exceptional ability. Both practiced from sunrise until darkness covered the mountains. One student grew increasingly desperate with every missed mark. He tightened his hold upon the bow until his hands trembled. He calculated every breath, dreaded every error, and judged every imperfect shot as evidence of failure. The harder he tried, the further his arrows wandered from the center. The second student listened carefully. The master offered him unexpected counsel. Before aiming at the target, become still enough to sense your own heartbeat. The young archer was puzzled. He had anticipated secret methods. Instead, he was given silence. Weeks passed while the first student continued wrestling with the target. The second learned to release tension from his shoulders, soften his breathing, and let the arrow go without grasping for perfection. One afternoon, the master nodded quietly as the arrow landed cleanly at the center. "It was never the target resisting you," he said. "It was your struggle." This story has endured because it reveals something profound about the human condition. Many people unknowingly fight life itself. They become so attached to immediate outcomes that every delay feels like failure, and every obstacle feels personal. They invest enormous energy attempting to control circumstances that have never entirely belonged to them. Ancient teachers commissioned contacted against this pattern. Trust does not mean doing nothing. Trust means doing everything that is yours to do without demanding that the universe conform to your timetable. There is a quiet but essential distinction here. Passive waiting abandons responsibility. Faithful action embraces responsibility while releasing the illusion of total control. Farmers comprehended this intuitively. They prepared the soil with care. They planted wisely. They watered patiently. Yet no amount of worry could command the rain. No amount of frustration could accelerate the seasons. Their labor ended where nature's work began. This cooperation between effort and trust formed the heart of many ancient philosophies. The Stoics urged people to devote themselves fully to what lay within their character, while accepting what remained beyond their reach. Taoist sages spoke of moving with the current rather than exhausting oneself by struggling endlessly against it. Expressed through different languages and cultures, the lesson remained remarkably consistent. Wise action is calm action. Modern understanding supports this observation. Under extreme tension, judgment frequently deteriorates. Choices become impulsive. Creativity contracts, and the mind loses access to broader perspective. Calmness, by contrast, allows greater flexibility, clearer reasoning, and more thoughtful response. The ancient masters lacked scientific terminology, but they recognized these truths through sustained observation of human life. An elderly gardener was once asked how he remained composed after repeated crop failures. Before answering, he knelt beside a young tree. I have learned the difference between caring deeply and clinging desperately, he said. His visitor asked what that meant. The old man smiled. I water the roots every morning. I cannot pull the branches to make them grow faster. How many lives are burdened by invisible pulling, forcing relationships before trust has matured, forcing outcomes before wisdom has developed, forcing certainty where patience is the only honest response. In doing so, people generate the very tension that obscures judgment and delays meaningful progress. Faith is not wishful thinking. It is disciplined confidence expressed through steady, unhurried action. It makes effort possible without panic, commitment sustainable without desperation, and perseverance endurable without constant fear. Perhaps this is why genuinely wise people often appear surprisingly composed during difficult seasons. They are not indifferent. They are fully present. But they understand that anxious control rarely produces wise outcomes. Their energy flows toward what can actually be cultivated: character, preparation, kindness, discipline, and clear perception. Everything beyond that is met with patience. As you continue your own journey, remember the lesson of the archer. Hold your purpose firmly, but do not grip life so tightly that your own hands begin to tremble. Release what cannot be controlled. Strengthen what can. Aim with intention, then allow the arrow to fly. Replace frantic control with deliberate action. Because peace is not found by abandoning effort. It is found when effort is finally guided by wisdom rather than fear. Expectation quietly shapes experience. Long before philosophers committed their reflections to parchment, travelers who crossed distant kingdoms noticed an unusual truth. Two people could walk the same road, pass through the same village, meet the same strangers, and return with entirely different accounts. One would describe a land filled with warmth, possibility, and unexpected connection. The other would speak only of suspicion, disappointment, and closed doors. The road had remained unchanged. Only the travelers had been different. An elderly teacher once asked his students a simple question before leading them into a neighboring city. "What do you expect to find there?" One young man answered without hesitation: "Dishonest merchants, difficult people, and endless frustration." Another smiled quietly. "I expect challenges," he said, "but I also expect to discover something valuable." The teacher offered no correction. When they returned several days later, he gathered them beneath an ancient olive tree. The first student's account was precisely as he had predicted. Every difficult encounter confirmed his belief. Every inconvenience became proof that the world was arranged against him. The second spoke of generous strangers who offered direction, skilled craftsmen willing to share their knowledge, and conversations that shifted the way he understood his own path. The teacher listened before saying something neither student had anticipated. The city simply reflected what each of you was prepared to notice. This lesson has moved quietly through countless generations. Expectation does not reshape reality. it shapes attention, and attention quietly constructs experience. The human mind is extraordinary in this way. It continuously searches for evidence confirming what it already believes. If someone anticipates betrayal, they become remarkably skilled at detecting signs of rejection while overlooking gestures of loyalty. If another expects opportunity, they naturally notice openings that fear might never recognize. The ancients observed this long before psychology gave it a name. They understood that expectation functions like an invisible lantern. Wherever it points, awareness follows. Everything outside its reach often fades into darkness. There is an old account of two traders who entered the same busy marketplace at dawn. The first arrived expecting failure. Commerce had been difficult in recent months, and he was convinced that circumstances had turned permanently against him. As he moved through the crowded stalls, he noticed only competitors with larger displays, buyers who passed without slowing, and small frustrations that confirmed his discouragement. By midday, he had packed his goods and departed, persuaded the market had become hopeless. The second trader entered through the same gate only moments later. He too had experienced setbacks. He too carried uncertainty. Yet he believed that somewhere within the crowd, someone genuinely needed what he offered. Rather than counting obstacles, he moved patiently through conversations. He greeted strangers with openness, listened carefully, adjusted his approach, and remained attentive long after others had withdrawn. As evening approached, he returned home with modest gains and several new relationships that would later become his most significant opportunities. The marketplace had offered both men identical possibilities. Their expectations determined which possibilities they were equipped to perceive. This does not mean optimism should replace discernment. The ancient philosophers consistently cautioned against mistaking hope for fantasy. A sailor who expects calm waters every day is underprepared for storms. A farmer who assumes every season guarantees abundance neglects wisdom. True expectation walks alongside realism rather than displacing it. The Stoics encouraged their students to prepare thoroughly for difficulty while refusing to become prisoners of despair. They anticipated obstacles because life naturally contains them. Yet they also trusted that character, discipline, and thoughtful action would reveal a path through those obstacles. Their hope was never blind. It was trained. Many ancient teachers encouraged people to begin each morning not by asking what will go wrong today, but what might appear if I remain genuinely attentive. That single question transforms perception quietly and completely. Modern understanding confirms what these observers recognized centuries earlier. Expectations influence behavior in subtle but accumulating ways. A person who approaches life with grounded confidence tends to engage more openly, persist longer after difficulty, and notice encouragement that others overlook. These small differences compound over time until they begin to resemble what observers call remarkable fortune. Yet much of what we name luck originates in prepared attention. Imagine moving through the same landscape carrying two entirely different maps. One marks only danger. The other acknowledges cliffs and rivers while also revealing hidden pathways, places of shelter, and sources of water. Both maps describe the same terrain, but one invites paralysis while the other encourages wise movement. Expectation functions the same way. It is not a forecast, it is a direction for awareness. Ask yourself honestly, what have you been expecting from life in recent months? Have you quietly rehearsed disappointment so frequently that genuine progress now feels unfamiliar? Have you anticipated rejection so consistently that authentic warmth slips past without being recognized? Or have you trained yourself to notice possibility while remaining grounded enough to prepare for reality? Ancient wisdom invites neither naive optimism nor habitual pessimism. It invites alert hope. Move forward with open eyes. Prepare carefully. Remain teachable. Believe that opportunities exist, but receive them with effort rather than entitlement. The world rarely becomes exactly what we imagine, yet our expectations frequently determine which dimension of that world eventually becomes our lived experience. Expect possibilities. Prepare with diligence. For the future often arrives wearing precisely the expression you have been quietly searching for. The kingdom is within. There is a mystery that countless seekers overlooked because it appeared too uncomplicated to be extraordinary. Many devoted their entire lives to climbing mountains, crossing deserts, accumulating treasures, pursuing recognition, and exploring distant horizons in search of a fulfillment that appeared forever just beyond reach. Yet the oldest sages consistently pointed in an opposite direction, not outward, inward. An old wanderer once heard accounts of a concealed kingdom unlike any other. Travelers claimed that whoever passed through its gates would discover unshakable inner peace and a form of wealth that no circumstance could ever remove. The man relinquished everything he owned and spent decades searching. He traversed frozen mountain passes, he sailed dangerous waters, he visited magnificent cities where scholars debated wisdom beneath ancient libraries. He questioned kings, merchants, monks, and farmers. Each offered another direction. Each assured him the kingdom lay just beyond the next journey. Finally, worn down by years of searching, he returned to the modest village where his travels had first begun. There he encountered an elderly woman tending a small garden. Seeing the exhaustion in his face, she asked gently what he had been seeking. "The hidden kingdom," he answered. She smiled as though recognizing a familiar story. Then she handed him a small bowl of water. "Look," she said. He expected to see some revelation. Instead, he saw only his own face reflected back. "The longest journey," she whispered, "was the distance between your eyes and your own heart." The wanderer stood without moving. For the first time in many years, he stopped searching, and only then did he begin discovering. This ancient parable has endured across generations because it speaks to a temptation that accompanies every era. Human beings naturally seek fulfillment through acquisition. We imagine that one more achievement, one more possession, one more title, or one more recognition will finally quiet the restlessness within. Yet experience gently teaches another lesson. Every external achievement eventually becomes familiar. The new home becomes ordinary. The advancement becomes routine. The recognition fades. The initial excitement settles. And then the restless mind begins searching again. The ancient philosophers observed this cycle and asked an uncomfortable question. What if the hunger is not located outside you at all? Many concluded that lasting contentment cannot be purchased because it belongs to an entirely different dimension of experience. It develops through self-knowledge. A person who genuinely understands their own fears is far less easily manipulated by them. A person who understands their own desires selects them more deliberately. A person who understands their own character carries peace into circumstances that once generated chaos. This is the true wealth the sages protected, not hidden treasure, but inner stability. An old craftsman accepted many students throughout his life. Whenever a new apprentice arrived, they expected to receive advanced instruction immediately. Instead, the master gave each one the same first assignment. For 30 days, they were instructed simply to observe themselves. Notice impatience. Notice pride. Notice envy. Notice gratitude. Notice moments of genuine joy. Most students considered the practice meaningless until something remarkable became clear. The quality of their work always mirrored the condition of their mind. A distracted craftsman produced careless results. An irritable craftsman left rough edges. A composed craftsman shaped beauty almost effortlessly. The workshop had quietly become a mirror. So had life. Modern understanding offers language for what these ancient observers already knew. People who develop emotional awareness, consistent reflection, and inner purpose often experience greater resilience, healthier relationships, and more enduring well-being than those who pursue external rewards alone. The external world carries importance, but it cannot permanently organize an inner world left in confusion. Consider a garden. Many people spend their energy decorating the fence while neglecting the soil. The fence impresses visitors. The soil determines whether anything truly grows. Your inner life is that soil. Every thought repeated consistently becomes easier to think. Every habit practiced patiently becomes part of identity. Every act of forgiveness softens the ground for something new. Every honest reflection removes another concealed stone. The harvest that eventually follows may appear in your relationships, your work, and your choices, but its roots will always remain invisible. Perhaps this is why the wisest elders often seemed composed regardless of their circumstances. Their security did not depend upon shifting conditions, because they had spent years cultivating something no storm could easily erode. A clear mind, a grateful heart, a quiet conscience, a spirit capable of stillness. These possessions cannot be inherited. They cannot be acquired. They must be grown. Each day presents another opportunity. Spend a few moments in silence before pursuing the world's demands. Ask yourself honest questions without judgment. Protect your attention from constant distraction. Practice gratitude without requiring perfect conditions. Gradually, your inner world grows stronger than the noise surrounding it. And then something unexpected begins to happen. Success becomes meaningful without becoming your identity. Loss becomes painful without destroying your foundation. Achievement brings genuine joy without becoming an addiction. The ancient kingdom was never concealed because it wished to exclude you. It remained undiscovered because most people never thought to look in the one place it has always been. Build your inner world daily, because the richest life is always constructed from the inside outward. Blessing multiplies what it touches. Long before kingdoms measured wealth by overflowing treasuries, the wisest elders assessed prosperity through an entirely different lens. They believed that whatever a person consistently honored would quietly increase in value. Not through chance, not through mysterious fortune, but because attention transforms everything it touches over time. There is an old story of a gardener who lived on the edge of a forgotten valley. Travelers frequently passed his modest orchard on their way to larger cities, and many wondered why his trees produced sweeter fruit than the vast estates owned by prosperous landowners. His garden was small, his tools were worn, his land was unremarkable. Yet every season his harvest appeared richer than the last. One spring, a young man paused beside the old gardener and asked the question that everyone secretly carried. "What is your secret?" The gardener smiled, resting both hands on the handle of his weathered shovel. "I greet every tree before I prune it," he said. The traveler laughed politely, assuming the old man was speaking in jest. But the gardener continued, "I tend every branch before it bears fruit. I water the soil before it becomes dry. I clear weeds before they steal strength from the roots." Most people celebrate abundance after it arrives. He paused, brushing dust gently from the young olive branch. "I choose to honor it before it appears." The young traveler remained quiet. Years later, after cultivating orchards of his own, he finally understood. The harvest had never begun in autumn. It had begun every ordinary morning when no one was observing. This simple parable contains one of the oldest principles in the entire tradition of human wisdom. Whatever receives consistent, genuine care grows stronger. Whatever is neglected slowly weakens, even if it once appeared to thrive. Many people spend their lives wondering how to receive more, while overlooking what has already been placed in their hands. They envision larger homes while neglecting the peace within the one they already inhabit. They desire deeper friendships while forgetting to tend the relationships that quietly sustain them. They long for greater opportunities while treating today's responsibilities as burdens rather than as preparation. The ancient teachers returned to this warning repeatedly. To overlook today's gifts is often to become blind to tomorrow's. There is a quiet principle woven into the fabric of ordinary life. Attention nourishes, neglect diminishes. This truth extends far beyond gardens. A marriage deepens through daily kindness more than through dramatic declarations. Health is maintained through countless small choices rather than occasional bursts of discipline. Wisdom expands through consistent study, honest reflection, and sustained humility rather than sudden inspiration. Even time itself responds to how it is treated. Those who guard their hours from endless distraction gradually discover that a single day contains more genuine possibility than years spent without clear intention. The old philosophers understood that blessing was never merely spoken, it was enacted. To honor something meant to treat it as genuinely valuable, to care for it, to protect it, to cultivate its highest potential. In doing so, the person offering the honor was transformed as much as the object receiving it. An experienced craftsman once accepted a young apprentice known throughout the region for remarkable natural ability. Within weeks, the apprentice grew restless. "I am prepared for greater work," he insisted. Rather than responding directly, the master placed a simple wooden hammer in his hands. "For the next month," he said, "care for this tool as though everything depends upon it." The apprentice was disappointed, yet each evening he cleaned the hammer, repaired its handle, maintained its edges, and stored it with care. When the month concluded, the master explained, "You believed I was teaching you to maintain a hammer." He smiled slowly. "I was teaching you to become the kind of person who protects everything entrusted to him." That single lesson shaped the apprentice's character far more profoundly than any advanced technique could have. Character develops through stewardship. Modern understanding quietly supports these ancient observations. People who intentionally appreciate their relationships, maintain their environments, attend to their health, and protect their time often experience greater satisfaction and enduring resilience. Not because life suddenly becomes effortless, but because attention consistently strengthens what it faithfully serves. Consider your own life for a moment. What have you been asking to increase? Peace, connection, health, opportunity. Now, ask a second question. Have you been genuinely honoring the small beginnings of those very things? The musician who treasures daily practice eventually performs with a confidence that surprises even herself. The parent who invests consistent time in honest conversation builds trust that no external reward could purchase. The student who genuinely respects each lesson gradually arrives at a mastery that once seemed unreachable. Greatness rarely descends all at once. It accumulates quietly through faithful attention applied over time. Many people search endlessly for exceptional opportunities while overlooking the ordinary responsibilities already in front of them. Yet history again and again reminds us that extraordinary lives are constructed almost entirely from ordinary acts performed with uncommon consistency. The gardener did not command his trees to bear fruit. He simply created the conditions in which growth could naturally unfold. Honor your health before illness reminds you of its worth. Honor your relationships before distance reveals how much they mattered. Honor your time before regret counts what distraction has quietly taken. Honor your character before greater responsibility is placed upon your shoulders. Blessing is not passive wishing. It is disciplined appreciation expressed through consistent, faithful action. Every moment offers another opening to cultivate what already exists. The old gardener understood something that many never discover in a lifetime. The richest harvest belongs not only to those who receive the most, it belongs to those who faithfully care for what they have already been given. Honor what has been entrusted to you, because whatever is genuinely cherished has a remarkable way of quietly multiplying. Time bows to patience. Before the first green shoot ever breaks through the earth, an invisible transformation has already begun deep beneath the surface, where no eye can witness it, where the seed is quietly changing. Its outer shell softens, its first roots begin searching through darkness. Life awakens long before any evidence appears. Nature has always understood something that restless human beings consistently resist. The most significant growth is frequently invisible. An impatient observer moving through a field only days after planting might conclude that nothing is occurring. The ground appears undisturbed. The wind moves quietly across empty soil. Silence occupies the space where effort was recently invested. Yet beneath every footstep, thousands of unseen transformations are already taking place. The ancients watched these mysteries season after season. They recognized that life unfolds according to its own rhythms, rather than according to human impatience. This recognition shaped the wisdom they passed carefully forward across generations. There is an old account of a young farmer who visited an elderly olive grower celebrated throughout the region. Hoping to build wealth without delay, the young man asked directly, "How long before my first grove produces abundant fruit?" The old grower answered without hesitation, "If the seasons are generous, perhaps 15 years." The young farmer's expression fell. "And if I work twice as hard?" The old man smiled, "Perhaps 20." Confused and frustrated, the young man pressed further. "How can greater effort require more time?" The elder gestured toward a magnificent olive tree whose thick trunk extended high into the morning sky. "If you become consumed by urgency," he said, "you will neglect the roots." Then he rested his hand upon the ancient bark. "This tree has endured storms, droughts, and the rise and fall of kingdoms, because someone long before us was willing to plant what they themselves would never fully harvest." The young farmer carried those words for the rest of his life. Patience, he gradually came to understand, was not waiting without purpose. It was working faithfully while respecting the pace at which reality actually unfolds. Many of history's most enduring achievements followed this quiet rhythm. Great structures rose stone by stone over decades. Master craftsmen devoted years to developing abilities invisible to ordinary observers. Wise teachers spent entire lifetimes shaping a handful of students whose influence continued long after their voices had grown silent. Nothing truly lasting was rushed. Yet modern minds frequently struggle against this ancient truth. We exist surrounded by immediate answers, instant exchange, and rapid outcomes. Gradually, we begin expecting life itself to conform to this same rhythm. When growth appears slow, discouragement suggests that nothing is actually changing. When success withholds its arrival, many surrender the very path that was leading quietly toward it. The greatest danger of impatience is not emotional discomfort. It is premature abandonment. The Taoist sages observed rivers for precisely this reason. Water never hurries toward the sea. It follows its course faithfully, reshaping mountains through consistency rather than force. Similarly, the Stoic philosophers reminded their students that meaningful character develops through choices repeated over time. Wisdom cannot be borrowed. Inner strength cannot be manufactured quickly. Every genuine transformation demands invisible seasons, seasons hidden from the impatient eye. Modern understanding reflects this same principle. Small habits repeated with consistency reshape identity far more effectively than dramatic efforts maintained briefly. The mind itself changes through gradual, patient repetition. Confidence develops through accumulated experience. Trust grows through dependable action performed again and again without fanfare. Nature and the human mind appear to share the same language: steady, unhurried progress. There is another old account of a sculptor who spent months striking the same enormous block of marble. Observers mocked him. "You have accomplished nothing," they said. The stone looked entirely unchanged. Then one afternoon, after another careful and deliberate strike, the entire block separated perfectly along its hidden interior line. Those watching applauded the final blow. The sculptor shook his head quietly. It was never the last strike alone. It was every patient strike that came before it. How often do we misjudge our own progress in exactly this way? We assume today's effort produced nothing because visible change has not yet arrived. Yet unseen foundations are forming. Abilities are developing. Perspective is deepening. Character is growing more defined. Roots are quietly expanding beneath the surface where no one can observe them. The harvest belongs not only to those who begin, it belongs to those who continue when continuation no longer feels rewarding. Ask yourself honestly, where have you become impatient with your own development? Which path have you measured too soon? Which season have you mistaken for failure simply because its progress remained concealed? Remember the olive tree. Its greatness was never produced by urgency. It was produced by faithful seasons. Remember the seed. Its most essential work happened underground. Remember the sculptor. Every invisible effort prepared the visible breakthrough. Time does not reward frantic urgency. It rewards steady faithfulness. Trust your progress, even when it remains hidden from view, because the finest things in life almost always mature in silence before they finally appear in the light. Identity shapes destiny. There is a quiet question that accompanies every human being throughout the course of a lifetime, though few ever pause long enough to hear it. Who do you believe you are? Not the name recorded on official documents, not the profession others recognize, not the titles gathered across the years, but the silent identity whispered within your own mind when no one else is present. because it is this unseen self-concept that quietly directs nearly every choice you make. Long before your feet walk a path, your mind has already decided whether you belong upon it. An old philosopher once observed that people rarely become what they desire. They become what they repeatedly believe themselves to be. At first glance, this seems too plain to carry much weight. Yet the elders who observed generation after generation of human beings noticed the same mysterious pattern emerging. Two individuals could possess equal ability, equal circumstances, and equal intelligence. Yet their lives unfolded in remarkably different directions. The difference frequently began with a sentence neither of them had ever spoken aloud. One quietly believed, "I am capable of learning." The other silently repeated, "This was never meant for someone like me." Those hidden sentences became invisible architects. Every decision that followed quietly obeyed them. There is an ancient story preserved among wandering teachers about a young shepherd who dreamed of becoming a keeper of wisdom. Whenever scholars passed through his village, he trailed behind them from a respectful distance, drawn by the quality of their speech and their thoughtful questions. Yet he never approached them. When friends urged him to speak, he always offered the same answer, "I am only a shepherd." Years passed. One evening, an elderly traveler noticed the young man sitting alone beside a fire, studying scraps of parchment he had gathered from roadsides. The old traveler observed in silence before asking a single question. "Who taught you that you are only one thing?" The shepherd appeared puzzled. "I have always been this." The traveler smiled gently. "You have always cared for animals." He pointed toward the worn parchments. "But your mind has been seeking wisdom for years." Those words unsettled the young shepherd more deeply than any formal teaching ever had. For the first time, he recognized that he had confused his occupation with his identity. His work had described what he did. It had never defined who he could become. That single realization altered the direction of his life. Years later, he became one of the most respected teachers of his generation. His knowledge had not appeared suddenly. It had been quietly accumulating from the moment he stopped imprisoning himself inside an old and borrowed description. The ancient traditions understood this principle with remarkable clarity. Before students received advanced instruction, they often underwent extended periods of preparation designed specifically to reshape their understanding of themselves. They were not merely offered new information, they were invited to become new people. Old assumptions were examined. Old fears were brought into the light. Old identities were gradually released. The teachers understood what modern understanding would later confirm. New knowledge rarely transforms a life unless identity shifts first. A person who privately believes they are careless will eventually abandon careful habits. Someone convinced of their own weakness often ceases trying before genuine limits are ever reached. Another who quietly trusts that they are becoming more disciplined begins making choices that steadily confirm that belief. Habits are never arbitrary. They grow naturally from the soil of identity. A musician practices because practice is simply what musicians do. A gardener tends the soil because caring for growing things has become inseparable from who they are. A wise person continues learning because curiosity has become woven into the texture of their character. Behaviors repeated long enough become habits. Habits sustained long enough become character, and character, quietly and without announcement, becomes destiny. This is precisely why the smallest daily decisions carry far more significance than dramatic resolutions. Every time you choose honesty over convenience, you deepen the identity of an honest person. Every moment of patience teaches your mind that patience genuinely belongs to you. Every act of courage, however unremarkable it appears, lays another stone upon the foundation of a courageous self. You are always in the process of becoming someone. The question is whether that process is intentional or unconscious. An elderly sculptor once accepted a curious young student. On the first morning, the apprentice eagerly asked when he would begin producing magnificent work. Instead of answering, the master placed a simple broom in his hands. "For 30 days, he said, "sweep this workshop." The apprentice complied without enthusiasm. Each morning he swept carefully. Each evening he returned every tool to its proper position. After a month concluded, the master offered his explanation. "I was never teaching you to clean a room. I was teaching you to become someone who leaves order wherever he goes." Years later, visitors admired not only the quality of the apprentice's work, but the quiet discipline that seemed to surround everything he created. His identity had shaped his craftsmanship long before his hands had mastered the instruments. If what you are hearing right now is shifting something in the way you see yourself, if your understanding of who you are is quietly expanding in this moment, write 11. "I am the architect of my own awakening" in the comments below. That number carries the frequency of new beginning, of identity stepping beyond the boundaries of old description, of the self becoming visible to itself for the first time. Leave it not as performance, but as a genuine declaration of the direction you are choosing. Perhaps the most powerful name you will ever encounter is not the one others use for you. It is the one you quietly repeat to yourself. Choose it with care. If you consistently name yourself unlucky, broken, overlooked, or defeated, your mind begins organizing your choices around those descriptions. If instead you patiently develop an identity rooted in wisdom, integrity, resilience, and genuine care for others, your daily actions gradually begin reflecting those qualities without conscious effort. Identity is not constructed through empty affirmation. It is built through accumulated evidence, through the repeated testimony of your own choices. Become the kind of person who honors commitments, who continues learning regardless of how much they already know, who serves without requiring recognition, who speaks with intention, and who remains composed when circumstances become uncertain. Over time, those actions no longer require deliberate effort. They become natural, the way a river naturally seeks the sea. Today, choose with care the name you quietly assign yourself. Then begin living as though that person already exists, because perhaps they do, waiting patiently for your daily choices to finally introduce them to the world. Live from your chosen identity, because destiny rarely shifts before identity does. Resistance creates bondage. There is a difficult truth that every generation eventually encounters. Life does not become lighter simply because we argue with it. Many people invest years resisting realities that have already arrived. They resist the passage of time. They resist disappointment. They resist unexpected change. They resist mistakes that cannot be reversed. And in doing so, they unknowingly create a second burden heavier than the first. The original difficulty compounded by the exhausting effort to deny its existence. The ancient philosophers recognized this dynamic long before modern understanding gave it language. Pain may arrive uninvited, but suffering most often grows from resistance. This does not mean accepting injustice or abandoning meaningful effort. It means perceiving reality clearly before responding wisely. An old captain once took a young apprentice on his first voyage across a restless sea. The boy believed that strength meant controlling the wind. Whenever powerful gusts pushed against the sails, he pulled frantically on every rope, shouting in frustration, as though sheer determination alone could redirect the weather. The old captain observed quietly. Finally, he walked to the center of the deck, released one rope, adjusted another, and turned the rudder with a calm and practiced hand. Within moments, the vessel moved smoothly forward once again. The apprentice stared in genuine astonishment. "You changed the wind?" The captain responded with a gentle smile. "No, I changed my response." The sea remained exactly as it was, yet everything about the journey was transformed. This account became one of the most enduring lessons among experienced navigators because it revealed a truth extending far beyond the ocean. Life rarely pauses to ask whether we approve of its conditions. Storms arrive, seasons turn, people depart, plans dissolve. Time continues its steady movement. Our freedom begins precisely at the moment we stop requiring reality to become different before we choose our next step. The Stoic philosophers returned to this insight repeatedly. They encouraged their students to draw a clear line between events and responses. Events frequently lie beyond immediate control. Responses remain profoundly, unmistakably our own. This distinction transformed ordinary individuals into people of remarkable resilience. Imagine two travelers caught in the same unexpected storm. The first curses the sky, complains without pause, and spends the entire experience wishing circumstances were other than they are. The second quickly identifies shelter, protects what matters most, and continues moving forward the moment the rain begins to ease. Neither traveler commanded the weather. Only one commanded himself. Acceptance is frequently misunderstood. Many interpret it as abandoning ambition or surrendering to less than what is deserved. The ancient teachers intended something entirely different. Acceptance is the willingness to begin from truth rather than from illusion. A healer cannot address an illness they refuse to acknowledge. A builder cannot repair a cracked foundation while insisting it is solid. A traveler lost in difficult terrain cannot find the correct path while maintaining that they have never wandered from it. Reality becomes genuinely useful the moment we stop arguing with its existence. Modern understanding reaches a consistent conclusion. Recognizing emotions and circumstances clearly without being consumed by them frequently reduces unnecessary distress and opens access to better problem solving. Denial extends suffering. Honest acknowledgement creates space for thoughtful action. The bamboo survives fierce storms because it bends. The great oak sometimes breaks because it will not. Flexibility has always been one of nature's most quiet and enduring forms of strength. Consider water once more. When it meets a mountain, it does not invest centuries demanding that the mountain step aside. It adapts, it curves, it flows forward. Eventually, the mountain itself begins yielding to the patient persistence of moving water. Softness accomplishes over time what force so often cannot. Ask yourself honestly, what reality have you been exhausting yourself trying to deny? A conversation that cannot be undone, a season that has already changed, a disappointment that continues demanding your attention and energy. Perhaps your deepest freedom in this moment lies not in immediately transforming the circumstance. Perhaps it begins with a single, different question. Given what is genuinely true right now, what is the wisest response available to me? That question opens passages that resistance consistently keeps sealed. The old captain never conquered the sea. He learned to sail it. The Stoic philosophers never guaranteed lives free from difficulty. They developed minds capable of meeting difficulty with dignity. The bamboo never defeated the storm. It simply refused to become its victim. Life will continue its motion. The winds will continue shifting. Your deepest freedom will not be found in controlling every circumstance that arrives. It will be found in mastering the spirit with which you meet them. Change your response before demanding different circumstances, because the person who learns to adjust their approach can continue moving forward even when the conditions around them refuse to change. The hidden rule behind every victory. There is an old legend about a forgotten sanctuary concealed beyond a chain of mountains where only the most patient and devoted travelers ever arrived. For generations, seekers traversed deserts and dense forests, sustained by the belief that within its innermost chamber rested a single scroll containing the greatest wisdom ever entrusted to a human being. Kings commissioned expeditions in search of it. Scholars spent entire careers debating whether it existed. Wanderers devoted complete lifetimes to finding its entrance. When at last one traveler reached the sanctuary after years of relentless searching, he anticipated discovering a single magnificent revelation, something capable of altering everything in a single transformative moment. Instead, he encountered something he had not prepared himself for. The walls of the chamber were covered not with one teaching, but with many. Each appeared almost simple when considered alone. One spoke of gratitude, another of patience, another of the discipline of spoken words, another of courage, another of imagination, another of faith. Disappointed and somewhat frustrated, the traveler turned to the elderly guardian of the space. "I crossed the world for this? These are teachings I have already encountered." The guardian regarded him with a quiet and unhurried smile. "No," he said, "you have encountered them separately." A pause settled over the chamber, allowing silence to complete what words could not. "You have never lived them together." Those words became the traveler's genuine discovery. Because the ancient masters rarely understood wisdom as a collection of isolated ideas, they perceived life as shaped by systems, not by fragments. A single seed cannot become a forest without water, light, fertile soil and consistent time. Remove one element and the entire process is undermined. So it is with human character. Many individuals search for one secret powerful enough to transform everything at once. One flawless habit, one concealed technique, one combination of words that unlocks what has always remained just beyond reach. Yet history consistently suggests another truth entirely. The greatest victories rarely emerge from a single extraordinary act. They accumulate from ordinary principles applied together with remarkable steadiness over time. Faith gives direction. Gratitude preserves perspective when circumstances try to narrow it. Imagination illuminates possibilities that logic alone cannot reach. Patience protects the long view when short-term discomfort tries to redirect it. Character sustains every choice when initial enthusiasm has long since faded. Together, these qualities form something immeasurably greater than their individual contributions. They form a life that holds. Imagine an architect preparing to construct a great bridge across a wide and unpredictable river. Faith allows him to believe the crossing is genuinely possible before a single measurement has been taken. Imagination lets him perceive the finished structure before the first material has arrived. Gratitude keeps him attentive to every worker, every setback, and every hard-won lesson along the way. Patience reminds him that the foundations hidden beneath the water carry more importance than the towers visible from the shore. Character compels him to build with integrity, even in the places where no future traveler will ever think to look. Remove any one of these qualities from the work, and the bridge eventually yields. Hold them together in living practice, and generations cross safely because of work they will never witness. Life follows precisely the same architecture. Ancient teachers often compared the human soul to a carefully crafted instrument. A single string, regardless of its beauty, cannot produce a symphony. Only when each string is brought into harmony with the others does music finally emerge. Wisdom operates by the same law. It becomes genuinely powerful only when its principles work together in concert. Faith without patience becomes restless frustration. Imagination without character produces hollow fantasy. Gratitude without action collapses into sentiment. Patience without purpose hardens into stagnation. Character without hope calcifies into rigid endurance. Each quality quietly depends upon the others. Centuries ago, an elderly potter accepted 2 apprentices simultaneously. Both absorbed identical instruction. Both demonstrated similar natural talent. Yet one eventually became admired throughout the entire region, while the other abandoned them. Craft within a few years. Visitors assumed the successful student had possessed superior gifts. The old potter disagreed with quiet certainty. He simply applied every lesson consistently. The other loved the feeling of inspiration. This one loved the discipline of return. One waited until motivation arrived. The other appeared at the workshop every morning, regardless of how the previous day had ended. One sought dramatic leaps. The other trusted gradual refinement. After 2 decades, their daily choices had become entirely different lives. The ancients never underestimated the quiet authority of repetition. They understood that identity is shaped not by rare moments of brilliance, but by ordinary decisions made faithfully across time. A river carves valleys through patient persistence. A tree reaches the sky through uninterrupted seasons. A wise life is built in precisely the same way, not through the force of extraordinary moments, but through the quiet accumulation of consistent ones. Modern understanding echoes this timeless observation. Habits that reinforce each other create compounding returns. A person who cultivates genuine gratitude tends to develop greater resilience. Greater resilience supports clearer patience. Patience deepens judgment. Sound judgment nurtures confidence. Confidence enables courageous action. Growth becomes a living cycle that feeds itself. Every virtue quietly strengthens the ones surrounding it. Perhaps this explains why truly remarkable individuals so often appear balanced rather than extreme. They carry courage without recklessness, humility without self-diminishment, confidence without arrogance, and ambition without the desperation that so frequently accompanies it. Their strength does not arise from perfecting a single quality. It emerges from allowing many qualities to mature together across time. Ask yourself a direct question. Which dimension of your inner foundation have you been neglecting? Have you been developing vision while forgetting patience? Discipline while neglecting gratitude? Hope while allowing character to remain unexamined? Return to the whole, because life responds in remarkable ways when the inner world becomes integrated rather than compartmentalized. The hidden rule behind every lasting victory has never been concealed because it was complicated. It remained out of reach because most people searched for shortcuts rather than for harmony. Do not seek one miraculous breakthrough. Become the kind of person whose daily habits quietly prepare the conditions for countless breakthroughs. Practice with consistency, because genuine greatness is rarely a single achievement. It is 1,000 faithful moments woven together so gradually, so quietly, that one day they simply become a life. The final secret of the game of life. Every ancient path eventually arrives at the same quiet threshold. Different teachers have given it different names. Different cultures have decorated it with different symbols and different stories. Yet, beyond every philosophy, every parable, and every carefully preserved lesson, the same profound recognition waits. The greatest victory has never been over life. It has always been over oneself. Imagine standing before an enormous labyrinth constructed long before memory can reach. Countless people have entered it. Many wandered endlessly within its passages. Some blamed the walls for their confusion. Others cursed the forces that had placed them there. Many became convinced the maze itself was their enemy, that something external and indifferent was working against them. Then one traveler, after years of circling familiar dead ends, discovered something that changed everything. The labyrinth had never been changing. He had. Each time fear governed his decisions,
He chose the paths he already knew were wrong because they were familiar. Each time impatience demanded quick resolution, he overlooked the quiet passages that required only stillness to perceive. Each time pride convinced him he already possessed the answer, he walked with confidence into another wall. But when genuine awareness began replacing automatic impulse, the maze seemed almost to rearrange itself. The walls had not moved. His perception had. The game had always operated by consistent rules. He had simply never taken the time to understand them. Perhaps life resembles that ancient labyrinth more closely than we have ever been willing to
admit. We so often assume that the outer world alone determines the texture of our experience. Yet, every principle explored throughout this journey points towards something deeper, something that was never going to be found in circumstances, only in consciousness. Scarcity begins within before it expresses itself without. Imagination quietly determines direction long before the destination is visible. Gratitude sharpens perception when fear tries to close it. Patience protects what matters most when impatience tries to discard it prematurely. Faith softens the resistance that exhausts so many capable people. Identity governs every daily choice, most of them made without awareness. And acceptance, the willingness to begin from truth, is the act that transforms resistance into the raw material of wisdom. Each principle appears separate until viewed from a sufficient distance. Then they reveal themselves as one, like rivers that seem to run in different directions until they reach the same sea. Many people invest decades working to master external circumstances while barely touching the one territory that has always been closest to them, their own consciousness. They seek certainty before they are willing to act with courage. They want results before they are ready to offer discipline. They desire peace without first pursuing self-understanding. The ancient philosophers gently, persistently reversed this order. Master the inner world, and the outer world becomes navigable. Not because every circumstance suddenly conforms to your preferences, but because you no longer surrender your peace to every wind that changes. A seasoned navigator understands with the clarity that only experience brings. The sea cannot be controlled, the weather cannot be negotiated, the tides cannot be commanded into submission. Yet through wisdom, preparation, and the kind of attention that only comes from truly caring about the journey, the voyage remains not only possible, but meaningful. Life asks for the same quality of mastery. There will still be storms that arrive without warning. Disappointments will still find their way through every defense. Time will continue transforming everything it touches without asking permission. But fear no longer has to serve as your captain. Impatience no longer has to hold the compass. Resentment no longer has to choose the direction. You do. This is the freedom the ancient teachers pointed toward with such patience across so many generations. Not freedom from challenge, that was never on offer and never will be, but freedom within challenge. The discovery that your response to what life brings is always, always more within your reach than the circumstances themselves. An old sage nearing the final chapter of his life was asked to compress everything he had understood across decades of study into its simplest possible form. His students expected a long and elaborate discourse. They had spent years preparing to receive it. Instead, the old man reached down and drew a small circle in the sand. He pointed to its center and said simply, "Stand here." His students waited for what would follow. Nothing followed. "There is nothing more," he said quietly. "When your thoughts, your words, your actions, your gratitude, your patience, your imagination, and your character all arrive at the same place, at the same honest and undefended center, life becomes surprisingly clear." Then he erased the circle with the sole of his foot. The map was never outside you. Perhaps that has always been the deepest and most quietly concealed mystery of all. Life is not only something happening to you, it is something happening through you. Every thought you entertain repeatedly becomes a seed planted in soil that is always more fertile than you realize. Every habit you maintain patiently becomes a path that grows easier to walk with each return. Every response you choose deliberately becomes another paragraph in the story you are quietly writing, whether you are aware of writing it or not. You cannot select every event that appears on your path. You can always, in every circumstance, in every season, in every difficulty, choose the spirit in which you meet it. And over many years, across thousands of small and mostly unwitnessed moments, that single choice shapes a life far more completely than most people ever imagine possible. So, if there is one final recognition worthy of being carried forward from everything explored in this journey, let it be this: do not consume your one precious life attempting to force reality into a shape it was never meant to assume. Learn its rhythms instead. Respect its seasons. Cultivate your character with the same steady patience you would give to the most valuable garden you have ever tended. Guard your attention as though it is the most finite and irreplaceable resource you possess, because it is. Strengthen your capacity for gratitude, not as a practice of positivity, but as a discipline of honest perception. Exercise your imagination not as an escape from difficulty, but as the blueprint for who you are genuinely becoming. Walk forward with the kind of patient confidence that knows it does not need to see the entire road before taking the next step. And when circumstances grow uncertain, when the noise increases, and the ground beneath your feet feels less solid than it once did, return to the only place where genuine mastery has ever truly begun: your own mind. Because in the end, the transformation that changes everything is not that life suddenly becomes simpler or kinder or more predictable. It is that you become wiser. And wisdom, real wisdom, earned through genuine attention and honest practice, has always been the highest form of victory available to any human being. These principles will be waiting for you whenever the road becomes difficult, whenever confusion returns, whenever the gap between where you are and where you sense you could be feels unbearable. Return to what you have heard in this journey, because the game has always had rules, and the moment you begin understanding them, truly understanding them, not merely hearing them, is the moment you stop being played by life and begin, for perhaps the very first time, playing it with intention. You have always been more capable than circumstance has allowed you to believe, more resilient than difficulty has permitted you to remember, more significant than the noise of ordinary life has given you space to recognize. The labyrinth is still before you. The rules have not changed. But now, perhaps for the first time, you hold the understanding that changes everything. Master yourself first. Everything else, every relationship, every ambition, every quiet hope you have carried longer than you can remember, begins there. It has always begun there, and it always will. Now go, and play the game as though you finally know what it is, the language you speak to yourself. There is a principle so quietly embedded in the fabric of daily life that most people walk past it every single morning without once recognizing it for what it is. It does not require ancient temples or wandering philosophers to encounter it. It does not demand a journey across distant kingdoms or years of devoted study. It lives inside the most ordinary moments of every ordinary day. In the words you whisper to yourself before your feet touch the floor. In the sentences you repeat when something goes wrong. In the story you tell yourself in the silence after a door closes. The ancient teachers were unusually precise about this. They understood that the spoken word carried a weight most people had learned to entirely ignore. Not the words directed at others. Those most people manage with at least some deliberate care. The words directed inward. The running conversation that never stops. The one that describes who you are, what you deserve, what is possible, and what has already been decided. That conversation, they insisted, was not merely commentary. It was construction. Long ago, a master of words was asked by a young student why some people seemed to carry an invisible burden everywhere they went, even in moments of genuine ease and abundance. The master did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked the student to close his eyes and listen. "What do you hear?" The student described the ambient sounds of the marketplace, the wind moving through the narrow streets, the distant voices of children. The master shook his head gently. Listen further inward. What does the voice inside your own mind say right now, at this moment, without effort? The student grew quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, he began to recognize something that had been operating in the background of his entire life without ever once being examined. The inner voice was not narrating the present. It was negotiating with it, constantly comparing, constantly evaluating, frequently accusing, and almost never offering the kind of patient, honest guidance that a truly trusted friend would extend. The master nodded. "That voice," he said, "is either your most faithful ally or your most persistent obstacle. And most people have never once stopped to decide which they wanted to be." This observation has never become less true. The interior language you carry shapes your experience of every external event that reaches you. Two people can receive the same criticism and walk away with entirely different inner worlds. One strengthened, one diminished. Not because the words were different, but because the voice that interpreted them was. Two people can face the same unexpected delay, the same closed door, the same unwelcome news, and inhabit entirely different emotional realities by evening. Because the conversation running inside each of them told an entirely different story about what the event meant. The ancient traditions were remarkably consistent in their approach to this. They did not encourage suppression of the inner voice or the forcing of false positivity over genuine difficulty. What they taught instead was examination. The practice of pausing, however briefly, between the event and the interpretation. Between what happened and the meaning the interior narrator immediately assigned to it. One wandering teacher carried this lesson in the form of a simple question he offered to everyone who came to him in distress. "Before you accept the story your mind has told you about this moment," he would ask, "is that story serving your growth or protecting your fear?" Most people had never considered that there was a difference. Most had assumed that whatever the inner voice declared was simply the truth. It had never occurred to them that the voice had a preference, that it tended, without supervision, toward the familiar, toward the cautious, toward the version of events that confirmed what had already been believed for many years. This is one of the most essential understandings in the entire tradition of inner wisdom. The mind is not a neutral recorder. It is an active interpreter, and its interpretations are shaped by everything it has been taught to believe, most of which arrived long before you were old enough to question any of it. The power available in this recognition is not small. Because if the interpretation can be questioned, if even a brief pause can be inserted between the event and the meaning, then the story can be rewritten. Not falsified, not decorated with optimism that has no foundation, but examined with genuine honesty and allowed to carry the weight of truth rather than the weight of accumulated fear. Consider for a moment the difference between these two interior sentences after an unexpected failure. The first, "This always happens to me. I knew it wouldn't work. This is just who I am." The second, "This did not go as I intended. What does it contain that I have not yet understood?" The external circumstance is identical. The outcome is identical. But the inner landscape these two sentences create is as different as a closed room and an open field. The ancient teachers would say that the first sentence is not honesty. It is habit. The second is not optimism. It is courage. The specific courage required to remain genuinely open to what a difficult moment might be trying to teach, rather than collapsing it immediately into confirmation of an old and limiting belief. This is the work that no external achievement can complete on your behalf. This is the territory that wealth, recognition, and even genuine success cannot enter unless you have already begun cultivating it from within. Because a person who has not examined their interior language will carry that language into every new circumstance, every new relationship, every new opportunity, and find, with remarkable consistency, that the world keeps reflecting the same story back. The practiced mind, the mind that has learned to witness its own voice with a degree of honest curiosity, begins to discover something that surprises most people the first time they encounter it. The story was never fixed. It was only familiar. And familiar is not the same as true. Begin, if you have not already, to notice the sentences that arise most automatically when difficulty appears. Not to judge them, not to silence them, but to examine them with the same careful attention the ancient craftsman gave to every tool in his workshop. Ask of each one, is this revealing something real, or is this protecting something old? That question alone, applied with consistency across ordinary days, quietly becomes one of the most transformative practices available to a human being. Because language shapes thought, thought shapes attention, attention shapes perception, and perception, as every principle in this journey has pointed toward, is the lens through which the entire experience of your one life passes. The game of life responds to the player who learns to speak to themselves with the same quality of honesty, care, and grounded encouragement they would offer to someone they deeply believed in. Not because the world is made of words, but because the person receiving those words, the one who hears them every single moment of every single day without exception, is being built by them, one sentence at a time. Speak to yourself as though you are already the person you are in the process of becoming, not as performance, as practice, as the quiet daily act of a mind that has decided to become its own most reliable ally, rather than its own most persistent critic. This is the final layer of the ancient game, and it has been available to you from the very beginning. It requires no distant temple, no rare wisdom, no guide from another age. It requires only the willingness to listen to the voice you have been living with your entire life, and then, with patience and honesty, to begin deciding what it will say next. The words you speak inside yourself are either building the life you sense is possible, or quietly dismantling it. They have always been doing one or the other. The only question that remains is whether you will now begin choosing which. Speak carefully, because the most important conversation you will ever have is the one no one else can hear.